Hello, welcome to this next episode of Moms, Maths, and Manuscripts. This episode is an interview with Dr. Liz Berry. Maybe some of you have seen her as Nature Neuroscience PhD on Instagram or currently at Dr. Liz Berry. As you will hear in just a moment, Dr. Liz is an assistant professor and she wants to be part of this new generation of mentors who focus rather on inspiring and uplifting and supporting their students, maintaining their passion instead of scaring and pressuring them to produce more, work more, and eventually maybe grinding them to the ground and leading them to burnout. And we talk a lot about her PhD story, which is, wait till you hear it, it's completely nuts. We talked about mental health and burnout and red flags that we shouldn't ignore and support systems and support pillars that we shouldn't abandon, and also about mentorship in general, the kind of mentor, the kind of role model that she wants to be for her students, and whether or not you are going to experience mentoring, managing people, whether you are in science or not. I think there is something in this episode for everybody because we are all having relationships with other people, and I think this conversation is and can be inspiring for all of us. I really enjoyed having this interview. I really enjoyed talking to Dr. Liz, and I'm sure that it's going to be a treat of an episode for you to listen to as well. Let's dive right in without further ado. Dr. Liz. All right, there we go. Welcome. So welcome to this next episode. I'm losing count of Moms, Maths, and Manuscripts, and I'm very excited, so it comes across like that. Today I'm here with Dr. Liz Berry, or Dr. Liz. I am super excited to welcome you here. Thank you for joining me, and let me introduce you first, and then we can continue with our conversation. So Liz is an assistant professor working at New York Medical College. She was hired on the tenure educator track in July 2024 after completing her PhD, also at New York Medical College in May 2023. Her main focus at work is instructing biochemistry content to master's, PhD, and medical students. And on the side, she also communicates science and academic life via her Instagram and TikTok accounts at Dr. Liz Berry. So welcome once again. And I wanted to talk to you about certain pieces of content actually that I saw on your platforms, because this was kind of the last push that I needed to DM you and invite you to this interview, to this podcast, where you talked about how you had so much work as a professor, as a young professor, and it was bleeding through into every hour of your day, into your weekend, and it was just a lot. And you still chose to kind of ignore all of that and focus on resting and actually relaxing during your weekend. And it was like a breath of fresh air for me, and I was so excited to see that. So I wanted to talk about being a role model, being an inspiration, and being this new generation of professors or PIs, maybe eventually, if you are going to have your own lab at some point, that model something different from what we might have had during our PhD experience. And I wanted to also learn more about your story, how you arrived to this, how you arrived to social media and sharing your struggles and wins and breakthroughs and everything so vulnerably, so openly on Instagram. And so everything and anything in between. I have some questions, but it's
I'm
gonna
happy to start wherever you want me to. I can start from why I started the account or, why I'm focusing on portraying myself as a work-life balance person. So which one would you like?
maybe let's start from the very beginning. Like, let's start from the spark, the initial inspiration behind you studying science. Why did you decide to pursue that track?
So why I decided to pursue science, I, as a child, was very obsessed with watching like nature and Novi documentaries.
Mhm.
And I would collect all these papers that came in the mail with the pamphlets going over different animals, different ecosystems. And so I originally thought I wanted to be like Jane Goodall.
Oh,
May she
wow.
rest in peace. She was my role model, like my full role model as a little girl. And I wanted to be, I thought, an ecologist or someone who works in the environment, out in the field, something like that. So that's really what sparked me to science itself. But then it turns out I went to my college, University of Rhode Island, for my undergraduate degree. I entered as a biology major because I knew I wanted to be a scientist, right? And I took an ecology class and I absolutely hated it. It was terrible. It
Mhm.
was not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to study population statistics of, migrating animals when they were coming out. I was like, this is not it. This is not it. Absolutely not. But thankfully, at the same time, I was in a plant science course. And I was obsessed with this professor. She was fantastic. Her name was Dr. Roberts. And I was doing very well in the course. I took an exam, I did really well. I had the courage to go up to her because I knew she had a lab. And I was like, would you be willing to meet with me to talk to see if you would let me join your laboratory? And this was the fall of my second year at the school. So as an early sophomore, I walked up to her and thankfully she let me in the lab. And I worked with her for 3 years, working on plant science and biofuel applications for a moss that no one can say, but I've learned how to. It's called Fiscomitrella patens. And thankfully, that was my first laboratory experience. And so that's really what locked it in that I loved science, I loved research, I loved learning new things, and the constant, I don't know, working in the lab and working with others and coming up with new ideas on how to analyze results and, papers that come out and what that means, what the next steps are for different pieces of the field. And so that's really what jump-started my trajectory. And obviously, I did not end up staying in plant science. I made the jump again to biomedical science because I felt a little disconnected in the plant science world and I wanted to have a human impact. And so I made the jump again into a PhD program. Thankfully, I was able to go right from undergrad right into my PhD program with no master's because I obtained a first author paper from my undergraduate research and switched into neuroscience. And that is where I am today. I am doing neuroscience and biochemistry.
It's a pretty big jump from plant science to neuroscience. How was that for you?
So I had no neuroscience knowledge. The reason I chose neuroscience specifically, obviously, everyone has something that's close to them. My Nana, she had Parkinson's disease, and I thoroughly did not understand the disease whatsoever, but I understood that I didn't like what she was going through, and I wanted to better understand what the brain was doing and how that was impacting her. And so that's really what brought me into neuroscience. I really just threw myself into a lab, knew nothing about the brain, didn't really know what neurons did or what, ion channels were, action potentials, any of that. Took a medical neuroscience course with the medical school with no neuroscience knowledge, so that was a shell shock. But I made it through that. But that's really why I switched into biomedical and why I chose neuroscience specifically.
I see. I think it's a common story that we all have something that is
Exactly.
personal and something that kind of inspires us to it becomes our why to go instead.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you said it was a shell shock, but also I think your story is just a big example or multiple examples of being so courageous. I know very few people who would, in the second year of undergrad, go up to a professor and be like, "Hey, take me into your lab." So
Yeah, I don't know what bit me that day, but I had some courage for some reason.
that's pretty amazing. I mean, it's also interesting that she was open to that professor, right? And would you say that she was your first role model as like what mentorship is or should be and shouldn't be?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was lucky enough actually to have her, Dr. Roberts, and Dr. Norris was the other professor who kind of co-led the laboratory together.
Mhm.
And I still talk to them like today, basically. I reached out last year when I was dealing with the transition between PhD student land into assistant professor land very quickly.
Mhm.
And they were both able to give me some really good advice on that. So I've maintained that relationship, and they absolutely were my direct first role models for a laboratory and research setting.
That's also really lovely that you had this positive experience and that you are maintaining that relationship. That's also, I feel like it's not very common. Often people kind of don't want to see that anymore or don't
A
want to
lot of the
interact with
time, I totally agree a lot of the time. It's just, I think I have not been really surrounded with a lot of female role models.
it.
And so I've really latched on to the support that they showed me originally, and I haven't really necessarily had that directly in my line since then. So I've maintained that.
Hmm. Can we now move to your journey from PhD land to assistant professor land? I think there was a short postdoc in between, right? But then you very quickly moved to being an assistant professor. Did
Yeah.
you always know that you want to teach, or did it just kind of happen?
So the teaching has really developed throughout my entire PhD. I was the teaching assistant for the graduate biochemistry course at my school, New York Medical College. And I did that for like 5 years, and then I transitioned to actually lecturing in the course the
Mm.
last 2 years of my PhD because it was a 7 year PhD for me. And so I really enjoyed it that entire time, and I really knew that I liked communicating science. Truthfully, when I finished my PhD and during that like interim postdoc year that I did, I was really pissed off at academia. Um, Maybe I don't know if you were following me at that point, but most of my content was centered around being extremely burnt out, was not really liking science too much, was really not enjoying the culture, was not enjoying the, constant pressure to perform and have to do work all the time and it's expected and you can't do anything else. And yeah, I was very angry and burnt out at the end of my PhD. So becoming a professor was quite far off from my what I was expecting. I was actually applying for industry positions and as postdocs or scientists, and as well as a lot of science communication positions as well, out for different companies like BioRender, for example. I actually had an interview with them. Um, and so this kind of happened because it fell in my lap. And so, things happen like that sometimes. I had the full background required for this position because I had performed and taught the content for biochemistry for 7 years, essentially. And so the person who was the director for all of the content at my school left all of a sudden. And then they had literally no one to cover any of the content, take charge, none of that. And the school was starting on a next cycle in like a month and a half after that happened. And I was still there doing my postdoc. And so I was actually approached for the position to apply for the position. And I'd made the choice at that point to give it a try because I know I loved teaching and see if the spark would come back. And thankfully it has.
Well, it's also curious to see this kind of lucky coincidences and how they then shape the future and the continuation of your journey. Well, also great that your spark came back, but then what you said about being burnt out and struggling with academia, academic culture at the end of your PhD, let's then backtrack from the assistant professorship and from that experience a little bit into your PhD. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that experience was like and maybe why the burnout happened in the first place? Was it, more outside pressure or your intrinsic reasons, maybe your personality or the combination of the two? And yeah, just whatever you want to share.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I'm pretty open about this. Um, I it got progressively worse throughout the every year that went by throughout my PhD. Obviously, the first couple years you're like, "Oh my gosh, I have no bags under my eyes. I'm ready to go. Let me work like crazy. I'm really excited." And then over the years you just what happened to me is I really started understanding how the system was impacting me and how there were hoops that you had to jump through, and you didn't really have the support to jump the hoops. you were really alone. There was no guidance or support for that. You really had to drive yourself in my case. And because of those chronic years of literally being isolated and dragging myself through the process with really no support from committee members, I'm gonna say, I got really burned out because I was, one, doing everything alone in the laboratory because I did not have a PI who was really in the lab very much. I was very independent, didn't have a lot of guidance. I had to teach myself electrophysiology, which is a technique in the laboratory that is quite intensive and has problems chronically, constantly. And my project also required me to administer an opioid to mouse models every single day for 2 weeks straight for each cohort. And so a lot of different factors, on top of maintaining like large mouse colonies by myself, like a lab manager. I had lots of tasks, was like running the laboratory, running my thesis, running other experiments with other like master students that were brought into the lab. It was a large amount of things that kind of snowballed and hit each other all at the same time progressively as the years went on. And I literally, at the end, how I actually got out and got my PhD is I stopped coming to lab. I literally was like, I am not coming in anymore. And the mouse colony might blow up and might be crazy. And it did it. Yes, it did, because there was no one maintaining and doing all of the work for that anymore because I had all this crazy pressure put on me.
Yeah.
And so I had to physically remove myself and say, I am done and I'm not accepting anything else because I am upset, struggling. My mental health was the worst I've ever seen it in my entire life, if I'm going to be completely honest. My coping mechanisms were not really working very much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I turned to, because I had such severe anxiety at the end, to taking CBD gummies because I literally could not function unless I could cut off the lower anxiety and not actually like feel it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, there was a lot of factors that really snowballed, and I had to drag myself out at the end, and that really left a bad mark on my view on the academic system. So that's a little snapshot into what happened at the end and how the trajectory really impacted me.
I mean, even that little snapshot is enough for me to say that this is completely crazy. This is nuts. And like I hear stories, I have experience, but this is one of the worst things I've ever heard, honestly.
Most people say that to me, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I thank you for appreciating what I was going through.
I mean, you are on the other side and it's yeah, God.
It was a
It is.
struggle, but thankfully, my partner was there the whole time. I
Mhm.
did let him know at the beginning because we started dating during my qualifying exam. And I was like, I'm letting you know right now, this is going to be absolutely insane. And so you better like sign up for this. Otherwise, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be crazy. And he stuck the whole time. So
Also
that
brave
was
man, yeah. Did you have thoughts about quitting at any point?
no.
No, okay.
I did not have those thoughts. I've always wanted to be a scientist. I've always wanted to be in research. I know this innately, and I've known this for forever. I just was really upset with how I was put into the system, and I had to figure out how to get myself out without the aid of others that I thought would be there.
Hmm. I mean, technically, it's not supposed to be on you, right?
No,
We are
yeah.
supposed to have
I think unfortunately though, it's a pretty widespread phenomenon,
mm,
and a lot of people just don't talk about it. They
well,
want to bury it.
that's why we're here
Yeah.
to talk about it. So your PI was not really there, so you didn't kind of have a supervisor, you didn't have supportive committee members, and you, from your story, you taught yourself everything that you needed, and you were doing a huge mountain of work by yourself. So there was no supervision, there was no mentorship in that period.
No, not really, no. For
I need
years.
some time to kind of digest it and be like, oh my God, this is crazy.
I mean, like, I definitely am able to achieve a lot of work in a small period of time if I can put my mind to that. And so I probably did put myself into the scenario in the beginning where I was very energetic and had a lot of energy and didn't really understand what was going on, that like, oh, of course I could handle this. I can handle this, like different pieces, but you don't really understand what that chronically will do to you
Mhm.
long term, and you can't really maintain all of those things long term. And so, one, I probably did take on things that I shouldn't have in the beginning, but I had no guidance telling me I couldn't do that or I
Yeah.
shouldn't do that, and then was expected to keep doing them even though I was suffering.
I see. I see. So you didn't put these boundaries from the beginning, and then it was kind of too
Yeah,
late almost to do that. Okay.
right.
I see. Um, yeah. Wow. So by the time you realized that, okay, this is too much and this cannot go on, there was just nobody who could take over any of these parts, like taking care of mice and okay.
Not particularly, no.
Yeah.
It was a very small lab too, so it's not like there were a lot of others to lean on. There was a postdoc when I joined the lab, but they had left a couple years in, and there was one other PhD student who was very new who was starting. So at that point, I was the senior everything and
Mm-hmm.
taking care of everything. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I see. I see the the background now more clearly. I think I did start following you maybe at the end of your PhD when you were talking about mental health, but maybe you were already kind of on the way out, so it was not as much darkness and so much, yeah, of this kind of information. Um, you mentioned that your coping strategies and coping mechanisms kind of didn't really work at the time, but what were they? What were the support systems apart from your partner who or which supported you and helped you go through this?
Yeah, so what I really have tried to do is, maybe because I needed to have something completely different, was do activities that were not anywhere near science related.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, I would draw, I would do art activities, I would binge read fantasy books like no return.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I really needed like a detox, I would, read an entire series in like a week or whatever, how long they were. Um, Try to go for hikes and be out in nature. One of the things that's like a daily task thing is I would take like baths, like bubble baths and stuff like that. That's one of my, like daily easy things to do. One, because when you do electrophysiology, your back hurts like no other
Mm-hmm.
because you're constantly like reaching. But two, it became one of those like ritual kind of things, like detox, relax, and then I would be able to go to bed without having like crazy racing thoughts all of the time. And so those activities and methods over time really didn't pan out and weren't able to actually relax me at the end because I couldn't actually remove my brain from what I was doing in
Yeah.
the lab or work.
I mean, the load, I guess, of stress accumulated and what's much larger than these activities could help with, but it is a rare thing and pretty amazing as well that you stuck with it because what I find very common and what I was also doing myself is that as soon as things get a little bit more intense and a little bit more stressful, then all the hobbies just go out of the window. All the like sports, self-care, time in nature, no, because I feel too guilty and then it's kind of like, what's the point of doing that?
Hmm.
Or I feel like I don't have time because I need to be working all the time. So how
Yeah.
did you manage to maintain these habits without this?
It's kind of multifaceted. So you talk about guilt. I felt guilty. Of course I felt guilty.
Mm,
I mean, you can't, the academic system just shoves guilt in your face like, oh, you're not reading the new Nature article that came out in this topic. You should do that right now, even though it's like 11 p.m. and you should, prioritize that over going to bed. So of course I felt guilty, but I really tried to be like, I need time to relax my brain in order to actually be productive. And the reason that I knew this is because when I draw, I am unable to draw if I'm extremely stressed out. It just doesn't, you can't, it just doesn't work because it's a creativity. And I realized that my creative battery would run out. And if my creative battery ran out, that's a red flag. I was like, I need to take a step back and maintain myself because if I lost my creativity, then I knew that I wasn't going to perform as well. with designing experiments, with critically analyzing data, because it all draws from that same pool, for me at least. And so I kind of used drawing as a way to gauge that in a way, because if I was like, look at my sketchbook, I'm like, oh, there's a gap of 2 months where I haven't drawn a single thing in it, because I date them. I'd be like, well, that's probably a red flag, and I probably was having a really tough time the past couple months, so I probably should check myself and figure out how to actually get myself to draw something again. So I did stick with it, and I guess maybe I was just more aware or had better tells to figure out and tell myself how to, I don't know, address the situation.
Two important things that you mentioned is that yeah, you have these red flags that are telling you, okay, 2 months gap in my sketchbook, I have to do something about it. That's I think everybody should have like everybody should figure out something for themselves that acts like this alarm, alarm, alarm.
Yeah.
Something is happening, something is wrong. Um, and then yeah, the fact that you actually continue doing it through even through the guilt, and so you had something to manage the guilt and be like, okay, I'm not going to allow it to overpower me and tell me that I am not good enough if I'm not reading a nature paper at 11 p.m. instead of sleeping. So that's um, that's not easy. I
So
feel like within the confines of academic system, yeah, you're going to be told from all sides and angles that this is how you should be if you want to be a good scientist, a good researcher, and to kind of push back against it already at that time as a PhD student, as a like young researcher is really hard.
I've been always kind of bullheaded though, so I mean,
Okay, so you have the personality to help. That's yeah, that's one thing that maybe I lacked, in this. I was maybe too agreeable and too like, okay, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna take it everything personally and yeah.
everyone has their own, different personality and different
Mhm.
way of viewing what feedback you're getting or anything like that. So everyone has a different, very different perspective on how it's going to end.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so mental health was um, in a bad place during the PhD
And after,
and after. Okay,
quite a while.
so would you say that by the time you started the professorship, it's got better, or it was still a little bit dragging from the PhD experience?
The entire year after my PhD experience was not good,
Okay.
pretty bad. Um, the first half of the year after I accepted the assistant professor position was getting better. I
Mhm.
also had a ton of different responsibilities and workloads that I was kind of snowballed with. So I wouldn't necessarily say like much better, but I would say this past spring was really when things started turning around for me. So honestly, almost 2 years after I got out, I
Mhm.
started actually recovering and feeling like my old self again and not feeling that dreaded guilt constantly pressing on my face. So about 2 years.
2 years. I mean, it's good to know that, yeah, it's honestly a good answer that will hopefully tell people that, yeah, you shouldn't expect that you're out and things will magically get better or that
They
things,
do get better. It just takes, it's okay if it takes a
yeah,
while because it does. It's not gonna, it's a long process.
yeah, 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 that it can be so drawn out and it's fine. And there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
Yeah. Would you say that this experience then um, changed or yeah shaped the way you are showing up now as a professor, that the way you are treating the students and
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have always had this question of, okay, everyone that is a colleague and everyone that is a professor now has a PhD. So they've all gone through the process that I just went through. Why don't they remember what they went through, and why are they still treating students like the system is, and why don't they want to treat them nicer or differently or just listen to them talk and make their what they're thinking just heard and valid? Because honestly, that's makes a huge difference. And so, yes, I am being different by just If a student wants to show up and ask me a question, awesome. Is it going to turn into something else? They talk about their personal lives or something they need to just vent about? Great. I don't care. I'm going to be there because I didn't have that. And that makes a huge difference if you can just have someone literally listen to you and actually hear what you're saying. You don't have to give advice. You just have to be like a backboard and receive it.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering the same thing. Like people, on one hand, they forget very quickly what it's like to also do experiments, and they demand, I don't know, let's say they demand a Western blot or something today. And, have you forgotten how much time it actually takes?
I just don't understand what happens to people, and I still don't get it.
It's like there is something that with the brain that's just, okay, I'm out, I forgot immediately everything. And then they also manage you, right? In a way
Right.
that, or maybe it's something that comes from this bitter place, like I suffered, I struggled, I worked all the time, so now you have to suffer.
Right.
But why do you want to propagate that, right?
I couldn't tell you. I don't understand. I just would never want someone else to feel like I have.
Hmm.
So like if I can help alleviate that in any way, even if I'm not the PI, I'm absolutely going to.
Yeah. So do you have time and space to interact with your students apart from just like teaching exams and
Oh,
yeah.
all the time. Yeah. They flood my office. So I have students I taught last year. They still come and see me. Students that I've new this year, they've come to see me. We haven't built the full relationship yet, but they come all the time. They feel very comfortable talking with me. I think it helps that I'm closer in age to them too. I'm the youngest professor at the school, and I'm also a female, so I think that makes me more approachable
Mhm,
than the older faculty that are present at the school.
mhm.
So yeah, I have a pretty good interaction with them.
That's lovely to hear that, yeah, you're there for them also for the personal stuff and for biochemistry questions and you're trying to do things differently. It's amazing that somebody does, yeah. But do you think I mean, you want to change the system, right? Because you don't want people to suffer like you suffered. But do you think it is changing already? Do you notice anything shifting?
So, I mean, yes and no. I mean, so what I've learned is student evaluations and student feedback are critical for the schools to respond to in terms of accreditation standpoints. For like medical school accreditation, graduate school accreditation. That's actually like a criteria that they look at and have to respond to like the state and stuff like that.
Mhm,
So in terms of that, any comments that students do make that are constructive and, changing things for the better are actually looked at now. And so I don't think that that was a thing before. So I think on that standpoint, things are changing because it's a requirement for schools to respond to that. Um, but that's really for courses, right?
mhm,
On like a PI student relationship, I think that policies are being put in place, but they have to be upheld. And I think there is still a disconnect in that portion because even if you make a policy, someone needs to be checking if that policy is constantly being upheld. And I think that's where it needs improvement because not every single PI is obviously going to be changing the way that they're mentoring. They
mhm,
are going to be performing in the same, way that academically everyone has been performing and, enforcing long work hours over what they should be, putting all of the guilt and stuff like that on students. So I think in some parts it is, but there is still a pretty big disconnect between in each individual laboratory because every single person is so different and it's very, individualized. Each lab is each lab and it's very separate from everyone else.
mhm. Yeah, from my side, I think I do notice from my studies that at least the conversations are happening. People are talking about mental health or burnout among PhD students, among postdocs, and that's already a big step because I feel like when I was in the university, I only heard, some whispers that, oh, somebody went on sick leave because they were so stressed, or
Right.
no, maybe if there was a question of a student committing suicide or something like that, then that would be also shared
Right.
like a scary story, but people didn't really kind of connect the dots and talk about, why that happened and
Right.
how we can prevent that from happening again. And I feel like even PIs that had some connection or some experience with the range of these things, they didn't really change how they were behaving.
Mhm.
And yeah, here in Europe, we also do talk about it, and there were conversations in like PhD program courses that we were doing at the beginning of the programs. But again, none of that affects the actual behavior of PIs very often. And even if there is like an ombudsperson in the university, or somebody who's supposed to mediate conflicts or supposed to say to a PI, hey, you have to do some kind of like management, people management course or program to learn how to deal with your students better, nothing happens
Right.
there. So there is still such a huge gap, and it's
And it's truly like I really don't think that a lot of people who need to understand these different things about mental health and what the culture or environment that they produce is giving people, they just really don't understand why they need to do that. They don't understand why someone else is being impacted differently than they were impacted by the same situation. And they don't think it's relevant, and they think that burnout culture is just a phase,
mhm, it's buzzword.
just like a buzzword that's being pushed around. And I'm like, well, no, it's actually been there. It's just has a label now, and people are more open to talking about it. And that needs to be something that's recognized. But they just physically can't even grasp it. They don't understand. And I've seen this in meetings.
Mm,
Like you talk about mental health and you talk about, work-life balance and stuff like that. And they kind of just like look at you like, why do I need to care about this? You know?
hmm Yeah, you said work-life balance, and I remember also a story exactly about that, how we, as young PhD students in the first weeks of our PhD program, asked the program coordinator about like, what is your advice about work-life balance? And she kind of laughed in our face.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Exactly.
So from that moment on, I think this should have been a huge red flag for me. It wasn't. So
I mean, that's everywhere.
yeah,
That's going to be a laughable topic for most places, unfortunately. And it should change. So that's why I'm trying to put my foot down and be an example that you can do it on normal hours and still be very successful.
yeah. This is bringing me to maybe a challenging question or challenging thought. Um, Maybe some people would argue with us
Hmm.
and say that if we are very compassionate and very understanding and very kind to our students, how are we going to have standards? How are we going to demand scientific excellence?
Yes.
How are we going to get students who are actually doing the work, because we're going to let them do whatever? And how do you balance holding students, or maybe your students, or just in general, students in a lab, yourself, to a high standard with being compassionate and understanding?
Yeah, so I think that there is a pretty easy answer to that, honestly, and people just aren't willing to accept it. It's the fact that, well, why is someone in a research lab? Why is someone doing a PhD? Why did they choose to go into biomedical science or whatever field that they want to go in? It's because they're passionate about it. They're literally passionate about that topic. And why are you trying to crush their passion? Why not help them maintain that passion throughout and just guide the framework and how they can be the most successful to achieve what they need to achieve? Well, keep them excited about it. I do not understand why people need to grind you into the ground and then destroy your passion like happened to me. Why did I need to hate science for a while? Did that really need to happen? No, it didn't. I should have been upheld and my passion should have been maintained by my peers, advisors, whatever, so that I could keep going and I didn't need to go through all that. You know? The reason you go into science is because you're passionate. So why are you fighting against that? No one else is signing up for a PhD program just because they want to be burnt into the ground for 5 years. That's not why they sign up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that people who are not passionate enough, or people who are not there for good reason, maybe they are going to be sorted out
Right.
anyway.
And that's fine. They'll
And
figure out what they want to do
yeah,
instead.
exactly. And then people who are passionate, they are going to be driving themselves. You don't need to put an extra weight and an extra, yeah, as you said, grind them to the ground in order to achieve excellency or like scientific whatever
Like
greatness.
you can create a deadline without being like harsh on someone.
Yeah.
Like it's just the connotation that things are given to people is just wrong. Like I mentored a bunch of master's students while I was doing my PhD, and they had very successful projects and were very positive on their work in the laboratory working with me because I let them be excited about it and I told them that it's okay if you need to take time and do something else. And they felt that freedom of like, okay, I'm respected. I'm going to come back and perform because I want to, instead of being forced to do it and then have a bad taste in your mouth afterwards.
I love this. I wish more people understood that. Yeah. So you started teaching already in your PhD. You started also mentoring students, mentoring master students while you were a PhD student yourself. Um, what kind of what kind of thoughts you had about mentorship back then when you just started this journey? What kind of mentor you wanted to be back then, and how has it changed since then?
So, I guess I've always been someone who will listen and will hear what someone else has to say. And I've always been like that. People have always, I don't more maybe more than I want to sometimes, have felt they could open up to me. And I'm very happy that they can feel like that. And so I've been receptive that people appreciate that from me. So I always thought that that was an important thing to keep up and keep going. And so that's always been an integral part of my mentorship style, just to be, you know, that open backboard to just listen. And you don't need to like, you know, respond right away. You need to see where the person's coming from before you have a conversation forward. And so that's a very big part of it. The other big part is creating a framework for someone without, you know, limiting them and being very clear about what I'm doing, which is, I guess, picks up on the science communication aspect. I have always been very annoyed when someone explains something to me that I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I figured out how to explain it to myself. And I'm like, well, they could have just said it this way in the beginning. And so another core part of it is that I would like to explain like a methodology or a concept in a way that's clear that allows someone to ask questions. Because a lot of the time, if you're snowballed with information that's like too much or too heavy or just explained in a very high level, what question are you going to ask? You don't know what to ask. And so that's my teaching style and my mentorship style as well because asking questions is really important, and I want to make people able to ask questions by explaining things that are difficult topics, but in an understandable way.
I'm feeling very tempted to send this episode when it's ready to like my former supervisors and a lot of people I know to be like, here, please, this is what you should be doing.
Will they listen or hear it? Well,
No,
they will actually they might listen, but will they hear it, you know?
indeed, that's the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to your Instagram, your social media science communication journey.
Mhm.
How did you decide to start sharing on Instagram?
Yeah, so as you know, as I said, I was the teaching assistant for biochemistry for during my PhD. And I realized that I was going to be transitioning out of being the teaching assistant into the lecturing role because I was asked and approached to do that. And I felt like I was going to miss being a teaching assistant because the way that I was a teaching assistant is I had my box of whiteboard markers, right? Because this was like pre-COVID, and then I transitioned to obviously virtual during COVID land. But I had my like whiteboard markers. I would literally draw like glycolysis, draw the Krebs cycle, draw like transcriptional regulation, like all this stuff on the board. And obviously, I love drawing. And so I would draw all these concepts for the students on the boards. And I was like, I'm gonna miss that. Like, I really liked interacting with the students and having their faces just like light up, be like, thank you. Like, I had no idea what they were talking about in class, but you just made it so much easier and it's not that bad. And I'm like, yes, that's why I'm here. And so I was going to miss that quite a
Mhm.
bit. And so I started my Instagram account really to communicate science because I was like, I really like drawing science concepts. Why don't I just try to make a community online to kind of replace the interactions that I was going to be missing with students. And so I actually started it right before we were all shut down in the pandemic, like
Mhm.
January 2020, and then have kept up with it since then. And it's been so amazing because I've made so many friends from the community I've developed. I've met them at conferences. I've had like Zoom calls with them. We have like group chats to talk about, if we're doing like brand deals and like what's crazy and stuff like that. And so that's really why I started it, and I'm not stopping anytime soon.
That's good to know. And you also talked very openly there about your journey, your struggles, your mental health, and then now things that I've seen more of is after you left your PhD is so what I mentioned at the beginning, choosing rest as a professor instead of focusing too much on your overflowing to-do list. And so I guess this is part of like you want to be a different kind of mentor, right? And you also want to show this on Instagram. Did you have connections with people also because of that and like people reaching out and saying, "Hey, this is amazing. Thank you for saying this out loud."
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I really started transitioning to that type of content towards the end of my PhD because I just needed an outlet to talk about what was going on in my brain because it was not working out really well. So I started to be creative with it in that aspect, and I've realized that a lot of people resonate with what I'm saying, and they would message me and say like thank you for just speaking about this or posting about this because like I feel very isolated and alone with these different topics. And because it's really true, everyone feels some of these things to a certain degree, and it's not talked about enough. And I think it's becoming talked about a lot more now because of social media, which is actually great because it builds a community for students. um, I think it's great for students to have, you can create a SciComm account if you want. If not, just follow a bunch of creators that talk about these topics, and then you'll feel validated in some way because someone is speaking them for you, and it brings you some community. And so, yes, absolutely, people have reached out, and I've absolutely created a bunch of connections because I've been speaking about these topics that we usually keep in our heads.
This is something that I've been thinking a lot about as well, that, how would my journey have been different if I had Instagram at the time of my 1 year stretch as a PhD student? Because maybe I would have also seen your content or other people and be like, okay, yeah, I'm actually not alone. I'm not the only one struggling and everybody else has it all together. I'm not the only one going through this shit and everybody else is having a very rosy PhD experience.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
I think maybe things would have been different. But then again, I think I left for other reasons, not just because of stress and burnout. But it is very important to have this sense of, yeah, community and, yeah, other people going through similar things and being, as you said, validated in your struggles, in your feelings, and knowing that also other people are there with you, learning to set boundaries and learning to say, hey, I'm actually going to take a weekend off and I'm not going
Right.
to work 24/7. So then you are getting inspired also, and maybe the trickle down effect is going to happen.
We
And
can hope. We can hope.
we can hope, yeah, for sure. So you are also modeling through your content, through your Instagram, some boundaries and healthy attitude towards work-life balance and work in general, and also how rest is important. And I actually really like that you mentioned creativity and drawing, and that you were noticing that if you are not being creative with your drawing, if you're not doing that, you also know that this is going to affect your work, because you are not going
Mhm.
to show up in the same way at work and be creative and design experiments and all that. And like now I see this so clearly. I have a 2-year-old, so in motherhood I see this very, very clearly, that if I am not rested, if I'm not um, putting or like filling my own cup first, I know that I'm going to be not a good mother. And somehow this was not a concept that I found very easy to understand back then. And I didn't think about how lack of rest or lack of, yeah, recharging my batteries somehow is going to affect my focus, my creativity at work, my productivity.
Mhm.
So for you, how was it? How was this connection made? You know, it just happened with creativity, with drawing, and knowing that you're not going to be creative at work, or somebody maybe told you, or and it was a light bulb moment. How did that happen?
So no one told me this, that's for sure. But I have to say, my mom is a very creative person. And I grew up with her designing costumes for different shows, musicals. I would be the mannequin, unfortunately, and get stuck with a lot of pins. She would do she would make like the clay that you can make from flour, and I would get to play with that to make props and stuff like that. She would always like have all these creative activities for me to do, probably because I was annoying and asked her a lot of questions, so she had to come up with things for me to do constantly. Um, but I've always been in a very like creative environment, I have to say. And so that's been a very integral piece of how I have grown up. And obviously, I've kept it along with me because I draw now, whether it's like on a piece of paper, right, in a notebook, or if it's on the iPad, or if I'm creating posts on Canva, which I thoroughly enjoy doing as well. That's another outlet, It all kind of like maneuvers, but I really realized that if I was pressured to do something like, for example, make a presentation on my research for some symposium or a class or something like that that I needed to do within a short period of time, because you have to do this so often during your PhD and on afterwards, you know that you have different qualities of presentations you make. Some of them are pretty bad. And the reason could be because one, you don't understand what you have to talk about, or two, because you are just like so burnt out that you can't make a good presentation. And I think doing that over and over again and realizing which presentations were more successful over others and associating with what my mental state was or how much time I had to be creative about it really made the connection for me, because I have become like pretty good at communicating science, of being a lecturer, being a presenter. I'm usually told that like good job on your presentation. It was explained so well, blah blah blah. And from the feedback that I received after each presentation and how I felt giving it, really, I think, aligned the connection between creativity and science, or just performing and work, honestly.
Yeah, I again, the connection should be made clearly and very early on at the beginning in our academic journeys, in our studies, but somehow never clicked for me. And it's really curious to see how it happened for you, and how growing up in this creative environment helped you kind of connect the two, connect the dots. So obviously this is one of your outlets and one of your um, support systems and pillars that help you with stress, with, yeah, maybe through difficult times. What are others maybe outside you mentioned some at the beginning, and then you said that they stopped working throughout your PhD. But what is happening now? How does rest and supporting your mental health looks like now?
Yeah, so I have lots of hobbies. And as you probably caught up with, I have tried to maintain them throughout. I love obviously drawing. We've talked about that. I love being outside, hiking, gardening. I'm very into being in nature. There's something just about walking through the woods that does something to your CNS. You just feel relaxed, opened up. So I'm always down for that. I also love playing video games.
Mm.
Love playing video games, and I finally have figured out what type of video gamer I am, and I am a cozy video gamer. If you don't know what that is, it's people who like to play farming sims, creature collection games. I am a Pokemon fanatic, and so there is a game coming out next week, which is right before my birthday, that I will be playing in that genre. So I play lots of video games. I love to eat good food, meaning I have the urge to cook a lot of the time. I love cooking good food. And, the typical things, hanging out with your friends, your family, and obviously my pets. I have a dog, which we just got in March. She'll be one next week. And I have three cats. One of them is a new kitten that we just adopted because he is best friends with our dog, and I couldn't get rid of him. I adopted his siblings out. They didn't really like the dog so much, but he really loves her and she loves him.
Oh, that sounds so lovely. I kind of yeah, I kind of also wish that we had animals here, but maybe at
They're
some
very
point.
comforting to have. I
Yeah.
always joke that my orange cat that I have, I got him when I started my PhD. He has his doctorate too. It's Dr. Moose.
Yeah.
That's him.
He's seen you throughout this whole journey and he's
He
been there
has.
on your lap. Yeah, that's amazing. A science cat.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think we discussed a lot of the things that I wanted to ask you. It was a lovely conversation, but let's kind of wrap it up with a few final thoughts. Mm, so looking back at yourself at the very beginning of your, maybe your entire science journey or your PhD in particular, what would be a piece of advice or one thing that you wish younger Liz knew?
So it would absolutely be that you need to communicate with all of your advisors every single week and be very upfront with how you are feeling in response to feedback, in
Mm,
response to what's going on, because you're not going to receive the questions. And so you need to actively make sure everybody knows what's going on with you because it doesn't go the other way most of the time.
mm. That's a good one. I think yeah, we all could have been maybe a bit more proactive and more upfront also about our feelings and about our boundaries and things like that. Yeah,
Because
that's
no one's going to chase you down to ask you about them, unfortunately. It's just not how the system's built right now. Hoping it will change. I send up emails to just see how people are doing, and it seems like they are appreciating that so far, but that's not common. So you really have to look out for yourself and make sure that you're not in a hole and everybody understands that you are going through something and how you're feeling on a daily basis because they can't read your mind, turns out.
yeah, and it should be clear, but it's also very difficult for, I think, on average, for a human being, it's very difficult to be vulnerable, right? And
It is.
to show this side of you. So
But
how
hopefully
did
by
you deal with
practicing it.
like what do you think is the key to kind of unlocking this vulnerability and being able to share with your mentors, your supervisors, this kind of things?
So I think that it probably stemmed with me learning how to take exams. I know that sounds very strange, but what I used to tell myself when I would take exams is that it will be over in 2 hours. So just put a smile on and do the best you
Mhm.
can and stop telling yourself all these negative things that aren't going to make you do well. And so I kind of carried that with me through everything. Like, okay, I'm going to have a conversation about what's going on with me right now. Why do I need to have all this negative self-talk about it? Just put it out there. you can confront and you can handle what conversation is going to happen. The good thing is it's going to be open and you're not going to be alone in your head with it anymore, which is worse a lot of the time.
Yeah, the thing about it's going to be over in 2 hours, or in the case of a conversation, probably in 20 minutes. It's a very helpful kind of reframe that it's just going to be this brief period of discomfort, and chances are it's going to go much better than you think it,
Exactly.
right? Yeah. Okay, so as a now experienced mentor, having mentored master students and now teaching and communicating science, or kind of being a mentor also for a lot of people on Instagram, um, what is one thing that you wish all mentors knew or practiced maybe in their journey of supporting others and bringing up younger generation of scientists?
Honestly, just asking, how are you doing and listening. Because unfortunately that's not done. You usually get like steamrolled by whatever they're going through, and then the student doesn't even get to tell them what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need to stop doing that and they need to step back and say, how are you doing today?
Yeah.
Or how has it been going? And let them speak. That would be great.
Yeah, and listening, and then actually remembering and acting upon
Yes.
the conversation that happens
Yes.
would be nice. And not like you heard them and then nothing changed.
Exactly.
Yeah, wouldn't that be a world to live in? No, but we are here hopefully to begin the snowball effect of changing the environment and changing how next generations after us will be going through this process and acting. Okay, let's do one last question and wrap it up for today. Do you have a favorite science fact, or maybe something that just completely blows your mind every time you think about it?
Favorite science fact. I mean, there's like so many different
Sure.
possible things. I for one thing that for some reason I did not know and it makes such a big deal for me is thinking about the different types of fuel that your different organs and cells use. Because I talk about metabolism a lot now in the courses I teach, obviously, and your red blood cells in your body, they only use glucose. They
Mhm.
literally cannot use any other fuel. They can't use fats, okay? They're not going to use proteins. They can only use glucose. And so, if you are in a state where you are hypoglycemic, you don't have a lot of glucose around, who's going to suffer the most? Your red blood cells are not going to do too hot unless they can have enough in your body. And that was something that really just blew my mind because I knew the brain was very dependent on glucose, but the brain can use ketone bodies. It can switch, it can use ketone bodies. That's why people go to the ketogenic diet. But your red blood cells are stuck. They're a bag of cytoplasm with no organs, no organelles in them, and so they only are using glycolysis to maintain themselves, which I thought was insane. So I'll leave you
Yeah.
with that.
I learned something new, so thank you so much. That's actually a very impressive, a very interesting fact. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I am feeling very inspired. I hope that so many people will hear that and think, okay, maybe there is something that I need to change. Maybe there is something that I need to see differently. Maybe there is something in my life that I'm not doing, skipping, that is a red flag about my mental health. So many nuggets of wisdom that you shared. So thank you. And I hope that we will stay in touch, and maybe there is a part two at some point somewhere down the line.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I love being able to talk about this. As we've talked about, this isn't talked about enough. And
Yeah,
so, if there is a recording that people can access, like this one, which will help them understand and not feel so alone, I'm always happy to come back and talk about this more.
perfect. Thank you. And I will put all your information in the description of the video, and also on Spotify and everywhere, so people can find you, follow you, and see for themselves the inspiration that you are. And
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to share it as soon as it comes out so that we can have a large group of people listen.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so now thanks to all the listeners, and we'll see each other soon.